Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan Pereira. For 2 decades, global news outlets have complained internet companies are getting rich at their expense, selling advertising linked to their reports without sharing revenue. Now, Australia is joining France and other governments in pushing Google, Facebook and other internet giants to pay. That might channel more money to a news industry that is cutting coverage as revenue shrinks. But it also sets up a clash with some of the tech industry's biggest names. Google, a unit of Alphabet Inc., has announced agreements to pay publishers in Australia, while Facebook said Thursday it has blocked users in the country from viewing or sharing news. Facing a proposed law to compel internet companies to pay news organizations, Google has announced deals with media houses. Australia's proposed law would be the first of its kind, but other governments also are pressuring Google, Facebook and other internet companies to pay news outlets and other publishers for material. In Europe, Google had to negotiate with French publishers after a court last year upheld an order saying such agreements were required by a 2019 European Union copyright directive. France is the first government to enforce the rules, but the decision suggests Google, Facebook and other companies will face similar requirements in other parts of the world. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the impact of Australia's new media code. Joining me on the program today are Abhishek Singh, CEO, NeGD, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, Subimal Bhattacharjee, cyber technology expert, and Kapil Sankhla, advocate of the Supreme Court. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Abhishek Singh, let me start with the program with you. Let's first try and understand and analyze the crux of the issue at hand.
See, as you already mentioned, the crux of the matter remains about what technology can do in disrupting businesses. So what has happened over a period of time that since the growth of digital technologies, the digital platforms like Google and Facebook are getting the lion's share of digital ad revenues at the cost of the news houses. So what the news publishers feel is that these platforms are using the content that they are generating, and since more people are accessing their content on these platforms, they get the digital ad revenues, and the publishers are dying. Their newspapers have shut down, their print ads have become like minimal. But the prime focus that remains in any democracy is that do we not require the news houses to function, or can we give the control to large platforms? So that has been the basis of the whole dispute. And Australia, after their commission passed a resolution, they decided to pass a law in which they will mandate the platforms like Google and Facebook to share royalties with the news publishers, because that's what is driving their digital growth. So they resisted. After some time of resistance, Google has buckled a bit. They have signed agreement with the Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, as they had done in France. But Facebook, since its prime responsibility is not only news, Google's main business is organizing information that exists on the internet. So Google is more likely to have a compromise and to find a middle path in trying to ensure that the news publishers also survive and they also use their platform for sharing the information. But Facebook is a bit tough nut to crack across the world. And since their prime business is not news, more of sharing photographs and sharing moments and sharing stories, they have not yet complied with. It will be good to see how the regulatory authorities in Australia take this matter further, because this will have a lot of lessons for the rest of the world in how do we regulate these platforms in the days to come.
Absolutely. All right. Since we are here, then Kapil Sankhla, let's talk about this particular aspect as well. Why did the companies take opposing stances, that is Facebook and Google, on the very same issue, and why could Facebook take the step that it did?
Well, let me talk about Facebook first, because it's very important. You see, these are news aggregators or information aggregators, and information is power. It's now the gold, so to say. The problem that we faced with companies like Facebook is that not only they've been trying to control the news, they've been trying to control the internet, but they've also been trying to control human behavior by using the information and the news that they have. And by doing this, their control over human behavior, which basically means your buying power, what you're going to see, what are you going to think, changes. So they're doing perception manipulation. So therefore, the game is much bigger for a company like Facebook that has been doing this traditionally. There are precedents to that effect. Google, on the other hand, is a pure aggregator, its algorithms are based purely on certain, so to say, checks and balances, that whether the catchwords are there, they actually check how many people are searching for the same term, etc. And then that site or that information rises to the top. The problem with Facebook is that this is not their core business, as rightly said by Abhishek ji. Their core business is to manipulate information so that you buy certain things, you think of certain things, and you basically, your perception changes in a certain way. And therefore, as rightly said, Google decided to get into a deal to purchase information. That's called fair share, that you always pay the source. So the concept of fair share is not new, it is internationally recognized, and Google has gone with the concept of fair share, saying that the source shall be paid. While with Facebook, the information need not be pure, it could also be corrupted. It could also be a certain information that is put in for a certain segment of the society to manipulate information for that certain segment of the society. You know, when you're talking about the toolkit case, for example, that's also media management of changing of perception of people. That's what Facebook is into. And therefore, how Google has taken care of this problem for them and how Facebook is dealing with this was tangentially different.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for taking us through that particular aspect and explaining what exactly is the issue there with these two particular tech giants. All right. Subimal Bhattacharjee, let me bring you in now. So, you know, around the world, we've seen that the heat is growing against, these tech giants and social media houses. What is it about their practices that governments around the world don't like?
Well, Frank, as you have been seeing for the last couple of years, the intensity of many of the governments to look more closely at what the big tech companies are doing has been far much more pronounced. And even in this particular case in Australia, if you see, they have been contemplating it for quite some time. Now, I'll touch a little bit on this. Even from a commercial point of view, if you see the Facebook versus Google case in this particular case, for Facebook, the news feeds actually just amount to about 4% of the total content. And when in the Australian Commission's report, if you see, for $100 of ad spend, it was shown that about $53 goes to Google, about I think $16 goes to Facebook, and rest all goes to whatever, the news portals or whatever like that. So now there is a kind of a scenario where, this particular thing has played out, how the Google versus Facebook have reacted to the Australian scenario. But if you see it, even Microsoft, much before this whole division or two different postures, positions have been taken, Microsoft has, in fact, spoken to the Australian government and said that, they are going to support the legislation and they are even going to pay for the news that they pick up from the sources. So very interestingly, you now see that all these tech giants who are, becoming a point of concern across geographies are now kind of, in different positions. Somewhere the cracks have come out about where each of them stand for. However, to come to your specific point about where this is going, I think this is also one of the areas, or this is also one of the aspects in which the tech or the big tech guys have to be regulated. Looking at what the US is looking at presently from their Congress, as well as how even here back in the country we are looking at their roles in the recent few incidents. We have seen how much of a double standards position they take. So I think all of these taken together, somewhere there is a realization that they have to be now taken to a point where their roles are seen to be proportional and justifiable, rather than becoming like demons and trying to devour everyone, trying to cut off everyone. Because at the end of the day, the digital world is going to devour everyone if there isn't a certain kind of a control or understanding about how everyone has to play in a balanced fashion.
Absolutely. All right. So Abhishek Singh, let's, like has been brought up by the other panelists as well, tech giants have run into trouble in India as well. How is the government looking at the, the whole situation, at the lopsided policies of these companies?
See, as in any segment of law, see, laws and regulations have to ensure that they get updated and they keep pace with the way technology evolves. So what we have seen is that the pre-technology laws or technology is evolving, and the way the big tech is consolidating power of information and the way it is using. So one has to ensure that our legal provisions are kept updated, and the regulators who are there to ensure compliance to laws are alert enough to see any violations. So what we have seen in Australia or in India, for example, has similar issues in many ways. Of course, the dispute in Australia currently is between the platforms and the publishers. But very often another dimension that comes in such issues is that are the platforms mere platforms, or they are also playing some role of publishers? What we have seen is that many of these platforms, whether it's Facebook or whether it's Twitter or whether it's Google, they do selective editing. It's not that they publish anything that a user publishes on their platform. So when it comes to any objectionable content or any violation of any law, very often these platforms take the plea that we are just a platform. The content actually belongs to the publishers. But when they are actually doing editing, or when they are blocking the posts, correct or wrong, by a sitting president of the United States, or when they are exercising other moderation like blocking accounts on their own, this means they have some powers of editing the content which is there. So once you are doing that, they are treading on the thin line of being a platform or a publisher, and in many ways they become a publisher. So that's where the issue of applying the same norms that apply to any other publisher in the print domain or the electronic domain, a TV channel or TV news, will need to be applied to them. So that's the issue that has arisen in India. Like once you are doing that, then whether you have to conform to the publisher guidelines or the publisher norms. And the second part is that, as per the law, if the government or the competent authority has a power under the law to issue a direction to you for blocking certain content or removing certain content or blocking an account under the emergency provisions which is there, and if that competent authority has done that, then you are legally bound to comply with that till such time you get a redressal from a superior court or superior authority. So without following so in India, what happened last week, and later on they complied with it, was in that direction only. They said that it does not conform to our policies. So when it's a question between the laws of a sovereign government, like in this case the Indian government, or the policies of a platform, it's very natural and obvious that the laws of a sovereign government will have precedence. Of course, the law also provides them an option to represent and to make a case or make an appeal. But till such time a competent authority or through a judicial order or through a executive order agrees to their grievance and agrees to withdraw that order, they will have to comply with that. Because if you're not doing that, you're not complying with the laws of the land. Any company which does not comply to the law of the land will have no business to function in a democratic setup. So that's Absolutely. What we are coming to.
Absolutely. All right. Kapil Sankhla, since we're here then, okay, so can India implement similar kind of policies like we've seen in Australia and in France under the present or existing framework?
Well, we already have the Competition Act, but this would require a special law to be passed. You see, when you talk about Australia specifically and other countries, you're actually talking about arbitration laws which are in existence, internationally agreed and admitted between the various countries under the unilateral laws. The difficulty that I see, and now to be the devil's advocate, is yes, it can be done, but should it be done? Because what worries me is this, that arbitration in its purest form is supposed to be extremely fair, fairer than the laws of a particular country. So when you talk about the process and procedure of arbitration, there is a certain comfort that a foreign national or a company would have when they're doing business in India or any other country, that should there be a dispute or a dispute with the country itself, or the government itself, then they can take recourse of arbitration, which would be fair. Here, the arbitration process that has been created, and let me just specifically talk about Australia, is what we call publisher heavy. As so, the idea behind it is good, but it raises an argument which has been raised in various countries at various times, called which is to the effect that the laws are, or the concerning procedure is what would be handled by a banana republic. You see, when you have one-sided arbitration process, which basically is there to harass or threaten the other side into submission, which in this case, as I understand, Google has done, is a very dangerous precedent. It is dangerous because there is no control as to what is going to happen next, and whether an arbitration process or a mediation process or an ADR process would be misused by a person who is in position to make those laws. So to answer your question, yes, it can be done, but we in India need to have fairer laws. And of course, we will learn from what's going wrong and what is going right with Australia and France and other countries. It should be done definitely. The source has to be paid. It should always be paid, and the source has to be protected. It is also a question of net neutrality. It should be done, but I think the arbitration process that should be created, or the ADR process that should be created, should be very fair. It could be a summary procedure. It should not be something where two parties just throw some figures in the air and the arbitrator picks one that he finds fair and just and makes it into an award. There has to be some kind of sense, a cognizance that needs to be taken into, and the process has to be created so that no party can challenge it or have grievance against it. That's my personal opinion.
Absolutely. Subimal, let's also talk about, will other countries follow suit now? You spoke about the US and how this matter is in the Congress. France, of course, has taken a tough stand. So, the European Union as a bloc could also implement what France has done. And now we have Australia too. And how will all of this impact these tech giants?
No, definitely, everyone is watching the Australian step very, very closely, including the European Union. And they are known to be the toughest as far as, legislations and regulations around cyberspace is concerned. What's very important is that, that the free run that big tech has been happening or has been having in so many of the geographies definitely is now going to get impacted, because once you make a dent on the revenue, in terms of whatever steps are taken where they have to share their revenue, with the various publishing houses and all, that's definitely going to be one of the measures that's going to impact them. Secondly, that's not only the restriction that would fall on them. I am sure there would be attempts right now to see that how, they are either broken up or somewhere the function that they pick up, they remain confined to a particular form of service rather than becoming, block aggregators about everything around cyberspace and all, because at the end of the day, you are stifling competition, and they have not been seen to be fair over, all this period of time. Always there was an expectation that these corporations, the way in which they functions and all would have been very, very fair and transparent with everyone. But as Abhishek has also mentioned, and in my 2 decades observing them, even with respect to our country, I don't think, that that's a very, very fair position that they've taken. So nations are now bound to act. The question is that globally, whatever dialogue happens on cyberspace hasn't become that kind of, binding in nature, doesn't have that much of impact as we have in, say, space, nuclear, or, some of the other areas that require global, interventions and regulations. So I think what should now actually be harmonized is that under whatever framework these global dialogues are happening, the group of governmental experts from the UN, or even they're forced to look at the multi-stakeholder approach, how do we ensure that these platforms remain with their proper efficacy, not becoming tramplers of individual rights, not becoming some kind of a threat on their own, and some of the past actions, Frank, has really shown that, they are somewhere thinking that they are already much powerful nation, or himself trying to imply some kind of sovereignty. They've assumed upon themselves that they can take off someone, they can block someone, they can, take some contents of some geography. So all these things, manipulations have to really stop. And that's where they will have to face the consequences.
Absolutely. All right, time to get closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward. Let's also talk about how over the last 10 months we've seen that, the media industry, or the print media industry, which was dying a slow death, has been given a new lease of life. They seem to have found their mojo now in the digital world. So what impact, Abhishek Singh, is this likely to have on the media houses too?
See, all that it shows and the lessons that it has is that technology is a big disruptor. And if we don't adopt technology and we don't kind of innovate, we will have challenges as we go ahead. The second big lesson is that we have to be wary of monopolies. The problem today is primarily because both Google and Facebook are huge monopolies. Facebook, especially in the social media space, since it owns both Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. All three of them belong to one family, and they are exchanging information. So other social media platforms need to come up. Government needs to think of, is it becoming too big? Does the Competition Commission of India step in? So those questions need to be addressed by regulators in order to regulate them. And the second is, yes, media houses will need to strengthen themselves digitally and ensure that they are able to drive traffic without being totally dependent on these platforms.
Kapil, Sankhla, a couple of things that I want to take forward with you. One, what does this mean for other companies? Can they also face the brunt? And what does this mean for the public at large?
Well, as far as other companies are concerned, yes. As far as those companies which are news aggregators or sourcing news from various sources, I think they would now be more responsible. The news sharing would be fairer. Quality news will increase. And as you rightly said, that there is a shot in the arm for the news industry per se. Having said that, relying on Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram for your news was any which way is a very dangerous trend that I saw, because misinformation was something which they're very good at. And so therefore, I think it is a shot in the right direction. Quality news will rise, and that's something, and reliance on quality news and quality news sources will rise. And I think that would be something which is very good for not only the industry, but for general population as well.
All right. And Subimal, Bhattacharjee, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I would think, Frank, that the role of social media in getting traffic to the news sites, that wouldn't dwindle, immediately. I think that will always remain. That their role definitely is there. I think it's very important to understand how, one, of course, the equitable distribution of the advertisement revenue, that a portion of that going to the news sites, that gives them some breathing space, and of course the regulatory part around these tech giants, that has to be undertaken very, very proactively. I think some lessons we are already showing from this country. I think at a global level, we need to have a far much more cohesive dialogue on this.
All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that we've seen that technology can be a major disruptor, and we need to have laws that keep up with technology as well. If tech giants are not reined in and are not bound by some kind of rules, then they will devour everything in their path. Some norms that publishers are bound by need to be applied to tech giants as well, because they too are in the business of content. We need to be wary of monopolies going forward and ensure that we give everyone a level playing field. What we'll see going forward once we have these rules in place is we'll see quality news, because this will ensure that the tech giants are a little more careful with the kind of content that they put up on their platforms, and we could possibly see fake news being reined in. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.